Hi, and welcome back. In this lecture, we'll cover a research elicitation technique called surveys. I'm quite sure that you've all heard about what a survey is, but let me just go over the definition again. A survey is a large-scale qualitative or quantitative examination of opinions, behaviors, knowledge, made by asking people a set of questions. As always, let's break down the definition into its characteristics. The first characteristic we can look into is large scale. Often surveys are sent out to a large audience. This has to do with the fact that the sample size needs to be big enough in order to form an accurate representation of the population. A sample size larger than 30 is said to be statistically significant and can be used to run statistical inference. If the sample size is smaller than this number, it's not really safe to generalize the findings in your sample to the rest of the population. But then again, there are exceptions to this rule. For the sake of simplicity and the scope of this course, let's take minimum sample size of 30. The next characteristic is qualitative or quantitative. Quantitative data is about data that have numeric variables like how many, how much, or how often. On the other hand, qualitative data is data about categorical variables. Note that a survey can be both quantitative and qualitative at the same time. It depends on the questions that you ask and how you ask them. For statistical inference, it's preferable to use quantitative data and use qualitative data to make more sense out of the patterns that you find. The third characteristic is linked to a set of questions. We distinguish two types of questions, which are open-ended and close-ended questions. Open-ended questions are questions where respondents have complete freedom to answer questions. It gives them the opportunity to include information such as opinions, arguments, connotations, a tone of voice, emotions, etc. This in turn allows the survey taker to capture more information than if it were simply a close-ended question. But it takes a lot of time to process and it doesn't lend itself to statistical inference. This brings us to the next type of questions, which are close-ended. These are questions with a finite amount of answers. There are multiple types of close-ended questions, such as a simple binary answer, such as yes or no. You also have multiple choice questions. It's more efficient to process, but it provides less freedom to the respondent. Another one is ranking questions, where the user has to indicate a degree of agreement or disagreement with a certain statement. This often is measured on a scale of 7 possible answers, which range from I completely disagree to I completely agree, or from not very important to very important. Next, we have the question of when it's best to use surveys. Personally, I would use a survey if I'm interested in studying a population or a large segment of users or customers. I would like to know what the population of users thinks of the product or service. How would I execute a survey? In the preparation phase, you will basically define your questions, build your survey storyline, define your population sample and send it out, plus also set a deadline. Now, when you define your questions, make sure that your questions are not leading to a certain answer, and also make sure that they are easy to understand. If your questions are hard to understand, you can be sure that respondents' answers will be biased. Don't hesitate to ask a colleague to do a cross-check, as they can take up the role of a respondent and give feedback on your survey. When you build surveys, the survey storyline, make sure to first start with easier questions and keep the harder questions towards the end. People will tend to not stop midway because they already came this far. Also finish your survey with demographic questions to make it easy again. Make sure that the overall duration of the survey doesn't take longer than 30 minutes. If the survey takes too long, people tend to lose motivation and won't answer questions as thoroughly as they did in the beginning. Define your population sample. This should be as random as possible to avoid any type of bias, unless you want to have answers from a specific group of respondents. Also, if you have a target amount of responses in mind, try to send out a survey to a sample which is 10 times the size of your response target. A 10% response rate is to be expected in surveys. Note that you can increase this response rate by also having a reward. You can send out your survey using free online tools that give you a large reach. Those tools will also allow you to easily study the results of your survey and to send reminders if needed. SurveyMonkey or Google Forms are good candidates. Make sure to include a deadline. I would say 2 or maximum 3 weeks should be sufficient to fill in a survey. You will most likely not receive any additional answers after 3 weeks. Now, let's move on to the execution phase. There's not much to do here apart from the monitoring of the numbers of responses and sending out reminders if necessary. As mentioned before, this phase should take around 2 to 3 weeks. In the aftercare phase, you can go through the responses of the survey. If you made a quantitative survey, it goes quicker as you can use statistical inference to identify patterns and other types of information. If it's qualitative, then you will have to go through all the answers of your surveys. So the duration of this phase tends to vary depending on whether it's qualitative or quantitative. Now, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages? Let's go with the advantages first. It requires a limited amount of time to fill in a survey for the stakeholder. It's very effective at reaching geographically dispersed users. Surveys are easily scalable for large audiences. You can have a good understanding of what your population wants or thinks of your product or solution. They are relatively inexpensive to administer, and surveys can enrich more subjective information coming from interviews such as opinions. Next, what are the disadvantages? Surveys usually have a relatively low response rate. You have to mind how you phrase your questions. Poorly worded questions may provide inaccurate information. The use of open-ended questions requires more time and analysis by the business analyst and is thus also more time-consuming. And finally, incentives for responding might come in expensive. What are some of the tips and tricks that you can apply when creating surveys? So first, focus your questions on high priority risks that have been identified. Identify user satisfaction levels with existing systems to set a baseline. Questions should be direct and unambiguous. Save complex questions for later in the survey, and also save demographic information for last. Create rewards for participating and create a survey with inexpensive online tooling. And to conclude, notify the participants when the survey is available and continue to remind them to participate. Voila, that's it for the survey elicitation technique. There is also another research elicitation technique called analysis of historical data, but I will not cover this technique in this course as it deserves a course on its own. That's something also for the data analysts among us. Sorry guys. I will see you in the next lecture. Bye.